Hey everyone, it's great to be here in Miami. Thank you for the intro. Today I'm going to be talking about the lessons I've learned from the last close to 2 years of using LLMs as a product manager. Now, within Kiwi.com, we use LLMs in various different ways. Of course, primarily for development, where a lot of our engineers, or I would say even more, all of our engineers rely on Cursor. We use it to automate various, as well internal, as well as customer-facing workflows. And lastly, of course, product. And I'm going to focus on the product piece today. A short bit about me. My name is Boris. Been building products for the last close to 10 years. I'm leading the search domain within Kiwi.com, and Kiwi.com is one of the leading platforms for searching for and booking flights. And what makes us special are the various virtual interlining combinations that we're able to put together from airlines that don't traditionally work with each other, and thus provide cheaper flight prices and better content for the customers. So today I'm going to go over 5 main ideas. The first one is the idea of leverage with LLMs. The second one, what your point of view should be. The third one, how this reflects on our role as product managers and engineers and product teams in general. Some of the main use cases I found to provide the highest leverage, as well as what could be the next steps here. Let's start with leverage. I really like this slogan from YC, which sort of summarizes why we do what we do. I mean, we don't code or we don't do product management for the sake of it. We ultimately want to build something that users want and that's going to hopefully create a successful business. Now, if you take this slogan and try and distill it into a formula, building successful products is essentially a function of how much you ship and what is the impact of what you ship. The right way to think about LLMs is simply as another variable in this equation, essentially something that provides leverage or a multiplier to enable you to ship more and to have more impact. What I see happen often with teams is that they get stuck in a lot of busy work that pertains to various meetings, internal processes, writing PRDs, or software design documents, writing Jira tickets, and so on. And what happens is that now in the market, there's a lot of products that try to automate this with AI or help you spend less time on it. However, I would argue that even with those platforms, these are simply examples of super low leverage work that rather, instead of purchasing yet another SaaS, that's going to be a cost for the organization and also a cost cognitively to use. You should just aim to minimize or eliminate entirely all the bureaucracy that stands between you and actually shipping products. So that's leverage. Moving on to point of view. I think you've seen probably, ever since ChatGPT came out late 2022, an idea of it being a super smart intern that sometimes messes up and you have to be really specific with, thrown around. However, I think with advancements in models, so both the foundational models as well as training methods with fine-tuning and nowadays with reasoning models, we can think of them more as basically intellectual partners, polymaths that are superhuman and executing basically any task you give them, that can operate across unlimited levels of abstraction, which I'm going to talk about later, but are sometimes a bit too agreeable. They're never going to critique you unless you specifically ask for it. And they sometimes lie due to the nature of models. They can hallucinate. Or sometimes with reinforcement learning, there is some overfitting, so they tend to also sort of make shortcuts to get to the answer that's going to give them the reward. Another buzzword we've had is prompt engineering. And this was thrown around a lot as well. You've all seen those Twitter posts like, 10 prompts that are going to change your life. I really think that we shouldn't overthink prompt engineering or talking to LLMs. With the models we have nowadays, you can just talk to them like humans. We should aim to understand the different personalities that they have that stem from the differences in how they're fine-tuned. When it comes to how to write, you simply need to provide context for the problem or the task at hand, and the constraints they operate within. You don't need anything more complex than that. And lastly, due to the non-deterministic nature of the models, you just need to iterate a lot, or even sometimes repeat the same exact query into the same model or a couple of different models, and you might get a better response. Another point I want to make is that for a long time, I've sort of avoided diving deeper into the technical stuff related to the models. But I really think there's a lot of value in understanding how the mechanics and the architecture of the model actually works. Fortunately, today we have great educators such as Andrei Karpathy. If you're an X, you've probably seen him quite a lot. And he has an amazing way of really teaching all of these concepts in a super easy way. So just simply learning about how neural networks work, forward passes, backpropagation, how the data sets are prepared and what do they contain, how does pre-training work, fine-tuning, reinforcement learning, and so on. Because ultimately, it's going to allow you to understand better how to extract more value out of LLMs. Third one, role. What is our role with all of this? I captured this tweet the other day from, I think this guy works at Entropic, and I really resonate with this paragraph, which tells us basically that LLMs are essentially automating or commoditizing the middle of the skill distribution. And if you want to be successful moving forward, you should either aim to be an expert in a super narrow field, or be an expert that can synthesize learnings from various different domains and create something net new. Which brings us back to how to actually apply this in the context of products. What's going to matter with or without LLMs is understanding users' data and experimenting a lot. Having genuine curiosity and bias for action, because with us humans in the mix, this is not something that an LLM will solve. Someone who doesn't have bias for action will not extract much value from the LLMs. If anything, they're just going to get automated away. Third one, being technical still matters. It enables you, firstly, to extract more value out of LLMs, build software more easily than ever. And lastly, at least in the current stage, sort of allow you to verify all the outputs of an LLM, for example, when you're vibe coding. And lastly, of course, not getting hung up on the latest buzzwords. I think it was mentioned on the previous panel, like we shouldn't jump straight to agentic applications where we can extract already a lot of value with simply using LLMs as chat assistants. All right, moving on to the use cases. So I talked about the low leverage use cases, but now a few of the higher leverage use cases that were actually used at Kiwi.com, along with examples. Starting with prototyping. Something that I think we're all guilty of and have seen in organizations is that we produce a lot of documents, so either software design documents or PRDs. In reality, nobody has time to read this. If they read it, they skim it, and then people get stuck on small technicalities, and then we end up debating something that's really not important in the grand scheme of things and with the feature that we're actually trying to build. The craft as well, and the taste, if you will, gets lost between the writing and building because we focus more on the form and getting everyone's yes instead of focusing on building a better product for users. And lastly, the prototypes, even though they're a super useful tool, they are sadly only considered as a nice to have or considered for super high impact projects or projects pursued by the C-level. So that would demonstrate how it's going to work. It's not really done in most orgs on a routine basis. These are a few examples of how I use prototyping, like coding prototypes with LLMs within Kiwi. So we were recently discussing an idea of displaying price history for flights. Writing this into a document and trying to explain it to engineers, product managers, data analysts, and other teams you need, it's pretty hard when it gets a bit more technical. Whereas with a few simple prompts, you can describe roughly what you want to do and shift the whole discussion from the formalities of the document to the actual feature and start from whether or not this provides value and only then moving on to the actual feasibility. The second example is from our internal process that refers to how we run A/B tests. We run a lot of A/B tests and we rely on an internal tool that's used for splitting traffic. And this tooling is configured by editing a JSON file that lives somewhere in some repo. Then you raise a merge request. Some developer looks at it, checks if it's correct, merges it, and then you manually post a message to a Slack channel, and you manually create an experiment analysis. And it takes like 30 minutes out of your day, which could really be spent in a better way. Me, as a product manager who doesn't code actively, knowing the entire process, I was able to put together an internal tool that basically fetches the JSON, displays it on a dashboard, allows you to make any kind of changes to the experiment, still aligns with the existing workflow by raising the MR, getting the dev to approve it, and then has a webhook that detects when the MR gets merged and pushes a message to Slack, as well as creates an experiment in Apple. And it literally takes 2 minutes instead of 30 minutes, and it's much easier to view when it's in a UI form, rather than copy-pasting and JSON into a formatter and then looking at what's running, what's not running. The last example is something really trivial, but I call this sort of a death by 1,000 paper cuts, is when teams get stuck discussing small technicalities of some small components and a lot of back and forth. And devs raise some concern, designer goes back, OK, I'm going to create a prototype. It takes 2 days. They create a Figma prototype, which are notoriously hard to work with. And then they all align, and then someone writes it up into a spec. Whereas you could just ask an LLM, OK, give me your best shot at a drawer. It creates a drawer. You guys iterate on it a bit until you get it right. And then you tell LLM, OK, put together a dev spec based on this, or give me the main ideas on how to solve, for example, the inertia for opening the element, instead of trying to figure all of this out from zero. Few tips here. Experiment with different levels of specificity. There is value in both being super broad with an LLM and being super specific. Sometimes being super broad creates more creative prototypes because the model focuses less on prompt adherence. Secondly, stick to common tech because there's more of it in the pre-training. So the model is more likely to perform well here. Use RepoMix. It's basically a way to package up your entire repository and feed it in an easy way to an LLM. Start new chats often, because we know that models are not great on long horizons, and do small iterative changes. And also, lastly, really try and learn how to run locally, debug, and deploy on your own without relying on tools like Replit or Lovable, because it's going to make you sort of vendor agnostic, and it's really not that hard, even for non-engineers. Moving on to data. Sadly, self-service is hard to crack in most organizations. Data analysts and scientists are usually swamped, and the data is luxury instead of a commodity. Here's an example of a really trivial question that usually takes some time to dig up with SQL. If you paste this into a model that's been appropriately primed for this through a system prompt, it goes through the exact same process as an analyst would and produces SQL that's runnable and actually on par or better and faster than what an average data analyst would do, especially a data analyst that's not intimately familiar with the problem space. Given the LLM knows about your tracking plan and about the product in general, you can also get a lot of ideas on what kind of analysis you can run that go even beyond basic reporting and more into data science. Few tips here. You simply need to understand where the data is, how it's stored, feed the schemas to the LLMs or docs if you don't have them. This is a good motivation to create some docs. Provide a few actual query examples. You can easily dig this up in your org or ask data analysts for it, and then you just ask away. Third one, architecture. I'm a strong believer in the fact that even product managers should understand system design. What also happens is that teams tend to constrain themselves too much when it comes to technical solutions. And not try to think sort of from first principles. And in this case, better or simpler options might be there, but they might not be obvious. LLMs can really help here, where you can simply dump all of your thinking you have about a problem, the options you've considered so far, and just ask for thoughts or help. And then you might get input on basically either the approaches you selected or some net new approaches that enable you to solve a problem in a better or faster way. Last one, upskilling. There was a lot of tweets on this topic end of last year, and they usually coincide with the releases of new models. I was also inspired by a talk at a conference in Zurich end of last year, where there was a guy, there was an ex-engineer from Google with zero background in biology, that's actually running a protein engineering company. And he was making a point that if a field is technical, it's usually not too hard to learn it. So here's an example of something I'm actually doing right now. I'm diving a bit deeper into neural networks because I'm super interested in it. And LLMs are basically sort of a tailor-made companion for you that can enable you to learn absolutely anything in an easy way, and you can ask endless stupid questions to it. These are some other sort of high-leverage use cases I found. I obviously don't have time to dive deep into all of them in these 15 minutes, but you can take a picture or see the slides later. What's next? It's fairly simple. Within your org, try to get approval to be able to use all the latest models. Share examples of great use cases internally. Try and solve a problem with an LLM, even if it's super inefficient right now. I see a lot of teams, when I ask them, like, do you use AI? Yeah, we tried it once, it didn't work, so we concluded AI sucks, and we didn't try it again. Like, try and get it to work, figure out why you made it work, and then continue trying it again as models develop. You're going to see that in 6 months, the problems that were not solvable back then are going to be easily solvable now. LLMs are, as I said, good reason to produce product documentation. And lastly, you need to go back to that first slide and really remember why we're building products. Again, we're not looking to automate sending emails or replying to our coworkers on Slack. We're looking to really create products that bring value, which again goes back to how much you ship and what is the impact of what you ship. That's it from me. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.